Good afternoon. This is Dr. David back with another episode of the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast. I've got a really exciting guest here today, and I don't say that lightly. And part of the reason why I'm really excited about him is his story, his journey, all the things that he's taught his clients and his patients. And I have to tell you, the thing that I'm really most impressed about is this guy, this doctor is a thinker. And I have to say that I'm kind of biased because, during college, as many of you know, I triple majored in biology, philosophy, and psychology, and I double minored in chemistry and sociology. But I have to say, I love thinking and I love philosophy. And when I meet someone who embodies all of that, it just really gets me excited, enthused, and fired up. So I'm really excited about learning from our guest today. A lot of the things that he's an expert in are things that I'm learning about and that I'm interested in. In particular, one of the first things that I gathered from reading about him was his ability to go from the micro or the microscopic to go to the macro. And that's in the big picture, right? So to me, what that means is it's the flexibility of a lens. In our society, lenses, cameras tell stories. That's why we love movies and love TV shows so much, because they're able to tell a story. And the only way that they're able to tell that story is by zooming in and zooming out in time and space, right? From the past to the present to the future, and also from what's near us to what's far away. And that's just a huge ability. And if you look at some of the preeminent people who've changed how we live, whether it's Steve Jobs or, Bill Gates from Microsoft, or it's, a number of other people. Jeff Bezos comes to mind. But if you look at people in society and history who've made great strides towards pushing mankind forward, one of the things that you'll see is their ability to think inside and outside of the box, right? To go from the micro, which is the microscopic, the things that people can't see without the aid of equipment, to go to the macro, the big picture that's usually too big for all of us to put the pieces together. So when I see people who can do that, it really gets my attention and my respect. So without further ado, I'd like to bring in my special guest today, Dr. Don St. John. Welcome,
Thank
Dr.
you.
St. John.
Thank you. Thank you for generous introduction. I am excited to be here with you, Dr. David.
Absolutely. Hey, welcome. And as our listeners know, the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast, even though I talk about a lot of things and I've spoken about, or we've chatted about and conversed about a lot of things during the past 3 seasons, I love covering things that I haven't talked about as much. And so, Dr. Don St. John has a PhD, and he's an author of a book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, an adventure of a lifetime. And, I just can't say enough about how excited I am to have him, even though it's from a distance, from Salt Lake City, Utah, where it's about 50 degrees colder, from what I've heard, than it is here in Atlanta. So welcome again, Dr. St. John. It is a pleasure for myself and my listeners to have you here. And I'm so glad that you're willing to share your time with us today.
It's my pleasure.
So let me share. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. So let me share a little bit about Dr. Don St. John. So very early on in his educational career, Dr. St. John realized that the box of traditional clinical psychology and psychiatry was too small to hold all of the tools and concepts needed for his healing. And I can tell you right there, that just, to me, that's one of the reasons why I kind of got the macro versus micro thing, because he mentioned the box, inside the box versus outside of the box. And also the flexibility of realizing the importance of traditional things and knowledge, but also being flexible enough to look outside of those things, right? And also the use of the word healing. And I love that word, because to me, healing is a word, or heal or healing is a word that encompasses more about the human condition than words like medicine and health. It really does. Health and healing to me go together. In addition, Dr. Don St. John has been forever grateful that he searched outside the box. Over time, he encountered not just tools and techniques, but different schools of thought, both novel and derived from wide ranging sources, which to me again says something about his flexibility and his ability to consider different discourses and different philosophies and different thinkings and ponderings on life and how it occurs. Decades of exploration led him to construct a view of healing, purpose, and human potential that includes four essential and interrelated components: the somatic, the body, the psycho-emotional, the relational, and the spiritual. And it's with that we're going to get started today. I'd also like to share this. As a psychotherapist, teacher, author, and teacher in the Christian Ayahuasca Church, Dr. St. John has also been immersed in the psychological, somatic, relational, and spiritual worlds for more than 50 years. And I love that part about relational and spiritual worlds because I do believe in the concept of the spirit. As you know, I have a self-improvement book that's titled Sweet Potato Pie for the Spirit, Soul, and Psyche. So there's a reason why spirit, soul, and psyche are all mixed in there in that title. As a child, Dr. St. John endured years of intense physical and verbal abuse in his Italian American Catholic home. He entered adulthood in a physically hypertense body, emotionally frozen, relationally retarded, and spiritually voided or void. This healing adventure of 50 plus years has resulted in a fulfilling marriage of 38 years or more to his life partner, the enjoyment of being in his body, which I love that. And you guys know I did an episode on trusting your body. It's not lying to you, about our connections to our body and our ability to trust our gut instincts and our intuitions. And then trust in his own abilities and instincts, the trust given him by others to guide their journeys, a love for life, and wonderment at a higher power. And I love that word, wonderment. So with that, I again welcome Dr. St. John, and I look forward to learning from you today.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. David, I was a very unlikely candidate to be a PhD, to be a psychotherapist, especially working in the style that I do, to be a fluid movement teacher. I grew up in a tenement project. There was a great deal of violence in my family, mostly directed towards me and my brother,
No.
but with a lot emotional fighting between my parents. I left home 2 days after high school, never lived back in that area again. And
Wow.
one day, age 20, I realized I needed help. I went to the Yellow Pages, found a psychiatrist, and that was the beginning of a journey that's been going, over 55 years. So here I am.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And that makes me ask the question. And I love asking this question because I think I learned from it. And it kind of reminds me of some of the trauma that I suffered in life and what led me to my journey of healing myself and to helping to heal others. Is you mentioned that at the age of 20 that you found yourself, you realized that you needed help or that you needed something, and you reached for information on that. Do you mind sharing what symptom or what thing, thoughts, or feelings that led you to seek out help specifically?
Yeah, it was very dramatic. One morning, about 5 a.m., I
Okay.
woke in the back seat of my car and I was bleeding from my throat. I'd been out hooping and hollering and drinking from about 5 p.m. until, I don't know, 2:30 in the morning, and with some friends. And fortunately, I didn't drive home because I was in the back seat, and they, just left me there. And uh, that's when I knew I needed help. And the psychiatrist I found was a psychoanalytically oriented psychiatrist. I became interested and started reading. I was fortunate to have sufficient intelligence to follow my interest in that field. And, one thing led to another. And, while I was in graduate school, I realized that talk therapy alone was never going to be enough for one who had been as highly traumatized. And that's when I began exploring body therapy. And it went from there.
I love
It,
that. I
yeah.
love that. And, even though a lot of my listeners know this, some people don't know this is, one of the big reasons why I started the practices, and I have several practices, but one of the reasons why I started the practices that I did, and I do the things that I do, is because I didn't see it magnified out there in the world. And my practices are styled after, Sigmund Freud and Milton Erickson. They're psychoanalytic in nature. I use hypnosis, I use hypnotherapy, things like that. And I've always based my practices off of the tenet that talk therapy alone and pills alone aren't going to solve the vast majority of problems. And part of finding solutions is helping the person who needs healing find their journey. And that's kind of what I got from reading the introduction and bio about you, is that you somehow were led to a journey, and that journey was about finding yourself and finding healing. Would you say that's true?
I would say that's true. I never shied away from trying something that I thought would be helpful. In the somatic area, two of the most important disciplines that I encountered were structural integration, also known as Rolfing. There's also Hellerwork structural integration, two
Okay.
other names, but it was the work of Ida Rolf and continuum. And continuum is based on the biological fact that we are some 65 to 75% water
Yes.
by volume. And the question is, how does water move? And
Yes.
can participate with that movement and become more fluid?
Love that.
I'm in, I'm in my 80s and I'm finding myself becoming more fluid.
Wow. I would have never guessed that you were in your 80s. Would have never guessed that.
Thank you. Yeah,
Absolutely. I would
that's
have never guessed that.
twins.
You know, the funny thing about it too is I have a diet, nutrition, health, wellness, and weight loss book. I call it just kind of a lifestyle human book. It's called The Nutrient Diet. And it's the first book of its kind. It's 50%, diet, nutrition, physiology, metabolism, all those things. And it's 50% the psychology of why we make the eating choices and nutritional choices that we do and how to change them. And the funny thing about it is when I was deciding how to start that book out, I looked at the human body and I said, we are water. And that's the first chapter of my book. So I love, and I didn't even know that about you. So it's so funny that that synergism comes in because you just said the same thing that I spent a chapter in my diet nutrition book, The Nutrient Diet, talking about is how we're water, how we are fluid, and how that has something to do with how we function and how we heal.
I'm very excited because, I'm hearing more and more people. There's even an institute called the Hydration Institute. And
Wow.
it's exciting to me. It makes me optimistic that more and more people are realizing how significant water is in our makeup and beginning to consider the implications of that. For example, you did in relation to food and diet. And yeah, my teacher did in relation to healing, you know,
Right.
because one of the things that trauma does is it disconnects our consciousness
Right.
from body.
Right. Absolutely. Dissociation. Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And one of the things too is I think it's not also a coincidence that when you ask people, well, what brings you peace? And a lot of times it involves water, taking a long bath, taking a shower, going to the beach, wading in the
Yeah.
water, hydrotherapy, dancing in the rain, you know. So when you look at it through the lens that you just brought up of looking at our connection with water and fluid, and you look at how we live, one of the things that you'll notice is that water and fluidity comes up over and over and over and over again.
Yes. Yes.
And that brings us to one of the things. So, I love learning from my guests, and that's part of the selfish reason that I have some guests on my show is because I really want to learn, and hopefully, my listeners want to learn some of the things too. So, one of the big things that I love about what I've read about you is, your system, the system that you came up with that connects or differentiates and connects the somatic from the psycho emotional, the relational, and the spiritual. So if you would just give me kind of your short take on each of those four things and why it's important, starting with the somatic and then ending with the spiritual.
Okay. Well, our very sense of ourself is based in part, in large part, or say significant part, by our connection, our conscious connection to our body, our
Right.
ability, for example, to feel our back muscles, our leg and pelvic muscles. Okay. And, losing or severing that connection diminishes sense of who we are.
Yeah.
We feel smaller, weaker, less whole. So that for me is a foundation, a grounding.
Mm-hmm.
And from there, of course, we go to the psychological, the emotional, all those conflicts, many of which are unconscious,
Right.
all like conflicts around aggression, conflicts around sexuality, core beliefs that are formulated before we're 2, 3, 4 years old,
Mm-hmm.
such as I'm not good enough,
Right.
such as if I get close to you, I'm going to get hurt or I'm going to get suffocated. So that whole area that psychologists typically traffic in, our emotions, our beliefs, our behavior. And then I think that the relationship area is important enough to be considered a separate component, to focus a lot of attention on what goes into a good relationship.
Okay.
And going from that to a more macro perspective, I don't think our culture has reached the point of evolution where real emotional intimacy has become the norm.
Right.
I think it exists, of course, but it exists more on an individual basis and here and there. It's not across the board. Generally speaking, in my experience looking at this for decades now, most of us have a lot of learning to do in the area of emotional and sexual intimacy.
Okay.
And then the spiritual area, like every culture, known to man has had some way of relating humans to the cosmos.
Okay.
And, I'm a great believer in the spiritual and psychological intelligent use of psychedelics.
Okay.
And, I believe that since my second year of graduate school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell where that's headed.
In 1960 and now
Yeah.
today in 2024,
Right.
there is so much.
Yeah.
I mean, there are college programs
Yep.
in psychedelic assisted psychotherapy,
Yep.
even though the state
Yeah.
in which that college exists
Yep.
has yet to legalize it.
Absolutely. Yeah. I
So,
I get emails every day from major universities and research places talking about MDMA, how, some drug is about to be approved based on that, about psychedelic mushrooms that are used in trauma and persistent depressive disorder and things like that. No, I'm sure you're loving this huge big bang and addressing trauma and things like that using herbs and psychedelics and stuff like that.
Sure, it makes me feel like a prophet, I
Yeah.
was, I was talking about it 50 years ago
Right.
because it made an impact in my life.
Yeah.
It just opened, as Aldous Huxley said, the doors of perception.
Yeah. True. True. And perception is so powerful, as you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's huge. I love how you connected those. So I want to jump in. So I know that we only have so much time today, and I totally, truly appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. So I'm going to ask you, jump into some things that I know are things that you've talked about and studied and helped people heal with. And then also things that I'm kind of curious about in terms of learning the things that you do and kind of incorporating some of those things and kind of how I approach stuff. And, just share as you will about these things. So one of the things that I know that you've spoken about or that you've talked about in the past is the social and political consequences of trauma. And I talk to my clients and prospective clients about that all the time because I urge people to get the help that they need. And a lot of times people will say, well, I can't afford it. And I tell them, I'm telling you, you can't afford not to, because they don't realize the economic, social, and other consequences of suffering in silence. And there's been so much research that's been done on the productivity and the economic costs of things like major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. What else? Schizophrenia. I mean, I could go down the list. But tell me a little bit about your thinking about social and political consequences of trauma and illness.
Okay. Yeah, for sure, Dr. David, because I think the consequences are vast, very, very huge. And it's not exactly trauma. It's how we respond to trauma, because I
Yeah.
believe to one degree or other, we've all experienced some type, even if it's simply, life negating messages.
Yep.
So with that, I mean, if you look at some of the major problems in our world, chronic illness, I talk about it in my book. I talk about how trauma compromises the immune system.
Yeah.
And, and from there, illnesses become more likely.
Yes.
Violence is almost always related to some kind of trauma.
Yes.
People who grew up in a loving environment, who received connection and care and attention and attunement, typically don't become mass murderers.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay? Violence. So, and addictions, another huge
Yeah.
problem.
Absolutely.
Anxiety, depression, relationship distress. And, some of the political stupidity, and I'm not going to say from which to the other.
No worries. No worries.
Right? That there's a great deal of political stupidity
Yeah.
that we don't just put our heads together and address what needs to be addressed. Rather, we engage in constant political warfare
Yeah.
to gain upper hand, over the other side. So
Yeah.
all these, because trauma does a number of things, and one of the things that it tends to do is it limits to the development of
Yeah.
the part of our brain, the
Yep.
part of the prefrontal cortex that needs to be nourished to evolve capacities such as empathy, self-regulation,
Yep.
huge.
Yes.
The ability to reflect and see ourselves. We can't look at ourselves and observe what's great about ourselves and what we'd like to change in an objective manner. And that gets carried out into the political reason arena. It's either black or it's white, or,
Yep.
so all these areas are touched by trauma and a lack of comprehension about what human beings need and who we are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not have said that better. And, as we sit here and chat about and converse about some of these things, obviously one of the first thing that pops in my mind is, you know, we've had enough problems in terms of human development when it comes to, you know, trauma and illness, in terms of some of the things you mentioned, like self reflection, self regulation, insight, objectivity, comprehension, things like that. But now that we've got AI and we've got, artificial intelligence, and now that we've got, all these social media platforms and all this technology and all these things, the first thing that I find myself wondering, and if you've seen any of the stuff that's been on TV lately on C-SPAN and stuff like that about the social media platform heads testifying before Congress and things like that, one of the things that I think is, well, are these social media platforms and AI and all these technologies, are those things going to help humanity with self-reflection and self-regulation and comprehension and compassion? And I'm not coming up with any positive answers, not from social media platforms and AI. I'm not.
Well, let me give you my perspective, Dr. David.
Yeah.
I think in the long term, over time, humanity has been progressing.
Okay.
That our consciousness, there's really maybe no time in history that humanity has lived in the level of comfort that we live now.
True.
As much access to food. And I think one can make a very good argument that in general, we've been progressing.
That is true.
But it's not linear.
True.
And as that line of progression goes up, I think it zigzags. So, for example, physics has been evolving and evolving, and then it learns to split the atom, and we're dropping nuclear weapons in 1945 in Japan.
Right.
And maybe over the next 50, 100 years, we're going to make real good use of nuclear technology.
Right.
And not be making more bombs,
right.
Hopefully.
Right.
I think it's the same with social media and AI.
Okay.
I think right now, kids glued to their phone.
Yeah.
And not getting out. We used to go and play. We didn't contact each other.
Right.
Via anything.
Right.
I used to go knock on doors
Yep.
if I wanted to play with a friend.
Yep.
I'd go to his place,
yep.
knock on his door. But now, it's a text.
Yep.
And the whole engagement might be by text.
Yep.
So that's detrimental. And it's contributing to that loneliness epidemic.
Yes.
That the Surgeon General of the United States, has called it a major risk factor in disease.
Yep. And suicide.
And suicide, and mental, emotional, physical health. So, yeah.
What do you? Go ahead.
I'm hoping that, we can turn it around over the next 30, 40, 50 years.
Speaking of the loneliness epidemic, and I love how you brought that out because, as I'm sure you know, they did a survey, I believe a survey late last year, and 90% by the survey, 90% of Americans said that we're in a mental health crisis in this country. And a lot of it had to do with emptiness and loneliness, which of course, as you know, leads to suicidal ideations and suicidal intentions, suicidal planning, suicidal attempts, things like that. What do you think in terms of your thinking, in terms of the factors that are causing more and more kind of this or contributing to the loneliness epidemic, and some of the things that you think would help bring us out of it? What are some major things that you think are at play in terms of contributing to it and also getting us out of it?
Well, I think contributing to it is that as a whole, we have more leisure time. When we had to
Yep.
go out to the farm,
Yeah.
when we lived on farms and we had to work and milk the cows 7 days a week,
Right.
and we were engaged in survival.
Yep.
You know, we were engaged in putting food on the table, staying warm, like that. But now, and it may not be a bad thing that it's being recognized.
Right.
It's being recognized. We've shifted over the last 75 years to a very urban, technological culture,
Yep.
and we're recognizing that we're missing something.
Yes.
I think it's a precursor, and I'm thinking this for the first time right now
Oh,
as
wow.
we're speaking. I'm thinking it's a precursor to a recognition and the initial steps to dealing with the fact that we don't quite get, understand, recognize, live what emotional intimacy is about.
Wow. That's quite a statement. I love that.
It just came to me, in response to your question, that we need in our lives, it's Maslow's hierarchy, if
Yeah.
you will, uh, or Erik Erikson's developmental
Yep.
stage.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to take off all our emotional clothing, the various personas and
Yep.
identities and subpersonalities. We need to be able from time to time to remove all that and express the depths of our heart to another person who can hear it and listen and meet us.
I totally
And
agree with that. Totally agree with that. And I think in doing that, I think, that kind of leads us actually to discovering who we are as people and our purposes and our passion and our journey and our true self, right?
absolutely, absolutely. And I could tie it back in to everything we've been talking about before. Like, if the body is shut down, hyper tense or disconnected, fragmented, that process is much, much harder to affect.
Oh, wow.
Okay. There's that relationship between the body and our emotional life and our intimacy.
Right. One of the things that I think about, and this is like one of the core concepts that clients who come to me discover. I've got, two offices now, one in Decatur, and then I'll have another office in Buckhead, in the center of Buckhead, which is probably like, the most affluent area in and around greater Atlanta. And even though my office in Buckhead is a lot more posh, one of the things that I have at my office in Decatur that I don't have in my office in Buckhead is a whiteboard. And I love my whiteboard because that allows me to kind of explain the connections and to go from the micro and the macro when I'm helping somebody understand their journey, their symptoms, their healing, things like that. So, it is an example. If somebody comes to me and they have grief, then we work through their grief and we diagram it and we draw it and we show the connections and the variables and Venn diagram it and those kind of things. And we do the same thing if somebody comes in with procrastination or trouble with decision making. We zoom in and we zoom out and we see the relationships between things, we dissect them, and then we start with a new foundation and we build from there. And, one of the kind of things that kind of came to my mind, popped in my mind from what you had just said is just kind of one of the bigger principles that I use in my office, which is the seesaw principle. And it's a principle about balance and equilibrium and how there are these kind of forces that make one side of the pendulum go up, the other side of the pendulum go down, and how we're constantly kind of in flux trying to balance those two as we ourselves change as well. And, that kind of makes me think about, one of the things that I was reading about you and how you talk about emotional intimacy and relationships and how relationships help reveal who we are and things like that. And also just kind of the balance or the tandem relationship of kind of becoming closer to somebody and less close and just kind of zooming in and zooming out and things like that.
I'm loving your image of zooming in and zooming out more and more as you speak about you operating its implications for me. I like that. So I think about finding your true self in relationships.
Yeah.
It is first of all recognizing that's where the deep satisfaction is.
Right.
That's where that in that process of getting there.
Right.
And the process generally doesn't happen overnight.
Exactly.
But in that process, we can discover, our challenges. We can discover how we like to present ourselves to the world. We can discover what we like people to think about us or of us. What it's like when we gradually, disrobe. I like that image because, there's a vulnerability in the human heart that we, as human beings, build many, many, many ingenious ways to protect that from
Right.
pain. And often as infants, the pain is too much to handle. And so we learn how to protect ourselves, but then we lose sight of that. It becomes an unconscious mechanism. And, the process of awakening is bringing to consciousness all those things that are, lying there dormant, unconscious. And the relationship, I mean, if you can't do it with any human being, go to a therapist. That's why one of the reasons I think many people should go to therapy just for that purpose.
Absolutely.
Learn to reveal their hearts without all the stuff in the way. I'll give you an example. We still good volume wise?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We're great.
Okay. Let me give you an example. Let's say a person, man or woman, is a chief executive officer of a major company and spends his or her day making decisions, being direct, strong, clear, to the point, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Decisive.
Excuse me?
Decisive. That sounds like the definition of decisiveness to me.
Yeah, decisive. Great qualities. Fits the job description. But then he comes home and meets his 2-year-old. You see?
I know where you're going.
Now, yeah,
I love that analogy too.
that ability,
Yeah.
that ability to take off the decisive,
Yep.
powerful, direct
Yep.
garment.
Absolutely.
play with the 2-year-old,
Yep.
or his or her partner is scared
Yep.
and needs reassurance, to be able to drop into the vibration.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm going to emphasize that, drop in
I love
to
that.
the vibration.
Yep.
Because, see, decisive, powerful has a particular vibratory quality
Yes.
appropriate to the boardroom.
Absolutely. I love that.
Okay. And that's where that fluidity becomes it's another place that it becomes very important to be able to shift vibration.
Yes. Absolutely. 100%. Love that. I wasn't even expecting that, but I love that. I love that phrase. You need to coin that phrase. Drop
Which
in,
one?
drop into a vibration. I that totally takes me. I've never heard that phrase that way, and it reminds me of the law of some of my beliefs about the law of attraction and just kind of how you vibrate with people and how people are in just different wavelengths and different frequencies and they connect. But I love that. I'm going to start using that phrase. You need to coin that, but dropping into a vibration. I love that. That's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you. I give it to you freely. No copy.
No, I love that. And one of the things that I think that you just kind of hit on, which is a strong belief of mine, is and I now that I look at some of the topics that you're an expert on and some of the topics that you help your clients with, you know, one of the things that I keep noticing is the concept of self. And I love that. And, you know, one of the things that I think I see a lot of people looking for or asking for in my daily work, you know, I consult in forensic and addiction psychiatry, but I also, you know, have my practices that are holistic in nature, just helping people from everything from, you know, ADHD to anxiety to panic attacks and panic disorder to, you know, ADHD and PTSD, et cetera, et cetera. But I find a lot of people who come to me who are looking for direction or looking for insight or looking for an awakening or they're looking for a reset or a reboot or a restart. And when I think of those concepts, you know, looking for a purpose or looking for a direction or looking for insight or wanting an awakening or in need of a reset, I think of the concept of self. And I think of things like, or terms and phrases like self discovery or finding your true self or creating yourself or revealing yourself. And all of that stuff to me kind of gets down to kind of the gestalt, I would say, of knowing who you are or knowing who I am or becoming who we are. Would you agree with that?
I would totally agree with that. And I think that's why we're here on Earth.
Yeah.
That's why we're here on Earth, to discover who we are. I think it's a process that involves a lifetime, if not more.
Yeah.
I'll just let it hang there for a while, if not more. And I think I called it in my book an adventure of a lifetime.
Yes.
And I don't think enough people yet understand it. But that people looking for insight, people looking for direction, as you just spoke of, I think that's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
You know, to discover, you know, what they're doing here and how they can evolve and how they can uncover
Yep.
more of essential, beautiful, lovely nature.
And I love how you use the word adventure. My dad is a minister, a Presbyterian minister, even though somewhat religious. I'm more spiritual than religious, but you know, to me they're slightly intertwined. But I love looking at the essence of words. And you used one of my favorite words, which is adventure. And when you split that word apart, you get two things: you're and advent. And I couldn't help but notice that. And so I love that the fact that you use the word adventure, because to me, adventure just means your advent.
Uh-huh. That's cool. That's great.
Yeah. Speaking of your advent, before we leave, and I mean I've learned so much during this. I would love to have you as a guest again. One of the things, since this is a huge thing right now, I wanted to get your opinions and your thoughts about this before we wrapped up. But one of the things that I know that you're highly familiar with in your practices and your work is kind of resolving substance use disorders and addictions through emotional healing. And I love that connection because that phrase that I just said, resolving substance use disorders and addictions through emotional healing, it implies that emotional illness is the reason for substance use disorders and addiction. But let's get your perspective a little bit about that topic, because I think it's huge now because so many people are presenting with addictions, and especially since COVID-19 and the pandemic, where people just are kind of inside all day and, those kind of things. I think it's even skyrocketed. So what are some of your thoughts about that, Dr. St. John?
No, I'm not sure I like the word illness, although
Okay.
it could be helpful for a lot of people
Right.
to hold it as an illness.
Okay.
I think it's more of an attempt to, like, a misguided attempt to solve a problem,
Right.
and it has negative consequences.
Okay.
But I think that problem is the problem of isolation, disconnection,
Okay.
loneliness, and I think that's the emotion. Look, you take something because you want to feel good, or you want to feel better
Yep.
than you feel. You're feeling empty, or you're feeling a certain ennui, boredom, or what am I doing here? Why am I here? And, you take a substance and all of a sudden you feel better, and, you get addicted to it, and it causes all kinds of trouble. And, I think the more we can recognize that we are on this earth to engage this process of discovering who we really are, and relationship is at the heart of it, and that, that understanding should, hopefully will, permeate our institutions, our schools, for example.
Right.
They're not predicated on the premise that we're here to learn who we are
True.
and to be deeply in relationship with others.
And many of them
You
want
know,
to get rid of philosophy departments too.
yeah,
Sadly.
philosophy, the arts,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I think, like, I was, I wasn't addicted to alcohol because I'd get migraine headaches, and the headache would keep me away from alcohol for at least 3 days. So I couldn't drink every day.
Okay.
So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that's really true or not, but I
Based off the
definitely,
metabolism of alcohol, it is. Absolutely is.
yeah.
Depending on which metabolite, if you look at ETG, if you look at ETS, if you look at PEth, all those metabolites, then you're looking at 3 days. So that makes sense to me. It adds up.
Well, it saved me because I didn't, I didn't become an alcoholic, but I was definitely a problem drinker in my 20s.
Yeah. Sounds, yeah.
I
You
get
said
into
that
fight.
is what led you to a psychologist or psychiatrist, right?
Yeah, because, internally I just felt bad,
Yeah. Yeah.
like, oh, and it's even hard to put in words because, it was a little different than depression, a little different than anxiety. It was
Right.
these, like these big holes where
Like
my
being
heart
law,
and gut been, yeah, and
like
being
being
lost,
lost.
like being lost in a psychic wilderness.
Wow. And the funny thing about that too is, just kind of wrapping up is, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about that is because I think we have a new addiction that hasn't been there. I guess it's been kind of there in some degree, in some fashion. But you've got so many young people who are completely addicted to social media platforms and their devices now. And the funny thing is, the more connected they are to these devices and these platforms, the less connected they are to themselves, in my opinion, and to other people and to emotions. And I think it's going to be tough for society to come up with some solutions to that, because you've got so many kids, in surveys, you'll ask them, well, which one would you rather lose, your younger brother or your phone? And they pick the younger brother. And it's just like, what?
Oh my.
Seriously. And I mean, it's funny, but I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, there's some surveys that they've had and some research they've done where kids felt that they would be more devastated by losing their device than by losing a relative or a sibling. And I couldn't have fathomed something like that as a child
That,
who was born in the 70s. You know what I mean? I could never fathom something like that.
yeah, that's, it's funny and it's absolute tragic.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, it's almost too much to believe.
Yeah, no, it is. It's really sad. It's really sad. Well, I am so glad that we had a chance to chat and converse today. I've learned so much, and then I've learned a new phrase, drop into a vibration. I have really learned so much, and I can't wait to get feedback from the audience and other clients of mine who listen to this episode. This has absolutely been a treat to have you as a guest, and I can't wait to have
Thank you.
back on another episode to talk about and dive deeper into some of these things that we've kind of uncovered today.
Thank you. I'd enjoy coming back and continuing a conversation with you. You're fun to talk.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. And with that, let's wrap up for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Don St. John, for chatting with us, for giving us some of the pearls of wisdom from your 50 years plus of professional healing and therapy and things like that. This has really been a treat. If you wouldn't mind, can you share with listeners and with me where people can find you, like your books, your websites, and things like that? How can people get more information about some of the things that we talked about today?
Okay, my book, Healing the Wounds of Childhood and Culture, An Adventure of a Lifetime, can be found on Amazon or can be ordered wherever books are sold. And on my website, which is www.pathsofconnection.com. PATHSOFCONNECTION. Pathsofconnection.com.
Awesome. That is such a treat. And if people want to ask you a question about or dive in deeper or seek you out for therapy or for anything in terms of getting getting in contact with you, what's the best way that they do that? Is it by your website or is it by email or some other route?
They can send me an email via my website.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much again, Dr. St. John. This has really been a treat. I wish you a fantastic and spectacular 2024, and I can't wait to have you back as a guest again.
Thank you, Dr. David.
Thanks, everybody, for listening today. Thank you, Dr. St. John. I've learned so much today. I've got a new phrase that I can use, drop into a vibration. I'm really excited to get feedback about this episode. Everyone, thanks for being here for the Fresh Start with Dr. David podcast, where we not only talk about problems, challenges, adversities and obstacles, but we also talk about solutions going forward. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. You guys have a great evening. Love you. Take care. Bye-bye.